House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Friday, February 2nd, 2024 at 9:07 in the morning. We'll use this half hour to 9:30 to hear have discussions with our UVM intern. Wiley, if you'd like to join us up front. Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. As always, Wiley Barzilay, UVM legislative intern for this committee. This week, I read one report and went to two bill meetings on a variety of topics. The first one, I watched a House Committee on Agriculture meeting on H673, which is an act relating to Vermont's outdoor recreation economy. Just to sort of give a brief summary of the law, or the bill, I guess, soon to maybe become a law. It has three main sections. First, it commissions a Vermont outdoor recreation impact study. That study will be conducted by the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, or VOREC, with consultation from the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council and the Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance. It'll assess a variety of aspects of Vermont's outdoor recreation economy, such as state, county level economic data, revenues and costs for Vermont's outdoor recreation economy, opportunities and recommendations for future growth. And the bill asks that $200,000 be appropriated to hire a consultant to conduct the required economic analysis. It was also stated by Representative Rice, who is who introduced the bill, that outdoor recreation accounts for roughly 5% of Vermont's economy, which places it second in the nation percentage-wise. So it's of particular importance to the state, obviously. Second, the law.
Sorry. Who's first?
Huh?
Who is first in the nation?
Hawaii. Yeah. I know. We just gotta keep fighting for that top spot, I guess.
Tropical, I guess.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Yeah, maybe if global warming keeps doing its thing, maybe we can compete.
$60K program. They have one. We don't.
Yeah. Gotta be it.
Anyways, the second major thing that the bill proposes is hiring a full-time program support specialist for Vermont Trails and the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. The Vermont Trails and Greenways Council is like an independent nonprofit that serves as an advisory role to the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. It oversees, maintains, and makes recommendations regarding the Vermont Trail System, which is a large collection of trails across the state, sort of managed and following certain guidelines as set by Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. The position would have several key responsibilities. It would help administer membership to the Vermont Trails and Greenways Councils. Trail organizations have to apply to be part of the organization. It would manage meetings, activities, and budgets of the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. It would assess the needs of Vermont's trail stewardship community. It would manage technical assistance resources for Vermont Trails and Greenways Council members, and it would execute Vermont Trails and Greenways Council's advisory role to the Agency of Natural Resources. And the bill asks that $100,000 be appropriated to establish the position. Third and finally, the bill asks that appropriations be made for best management practices, or for the creation of a set of best management practices for Vermont's trail system. So they would do that through hiring a consultant through the Department of Forest, Parks, Recreation, and the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council to sort of help develop and establish those best management practices. They would ideally be adopted and implemented across the state, and they ask for $50,000 to be appropriated for that position. I think the intention is broadly just to ensure that the trails across the state are sort of managed in a sustainable but also economically productive manner, and in a way that is also consistent and broadly applicable. So that is that report. Yes.
The council, is that within within the agency or is that outside the agency?
There was some confusion on that within the meeting. When I'm going to get her last name right, Ellen Kozowski. She's from the Office of Legislative Counsel. When she was doing the bill rundown, she seemed unsure, but sort of implied that it was. But I went to their website and I don't think that they are, because they label themselves as an independent nonprofit. But it seems like they work very closely with what is the name of the agency? Forest Parks and Recreation.
Yeah.
And I think that they're like kind of just they sort of represent a variety of different trail organizations across the state. It was also stated by the Office of Legislative Counsel. She was unsure, but she thinks that they don't even have any full-time staff, and that might be why they're trying to hire somebody for the position.
You talk about the intersection between like Green Mountain Club and the existing trail organizations in the state?
Not really. But
It's just as an aside on this outdoor rec day is February 16th. And that's gonna be it.
They'll be
Coming in, right?
They'll be coming in here too. It might be something we want to remember to chat with them.
The second thing that I looked at was a report from the Vermont Agency of Digital Services titled their Cybersecurity for Critical Infrastructure report. It's primarily focused on the progress of the Cybersecurity Advisory Council, which was established by Act 71, which was a law to establish the Cybersecurity Advisory Council with the purpose of advising the state's advising on the state's cybersecurity infrastructure, best practices, communication protocols, standards, training, and safeguards. It's composed of 11 members representing people in the Agency of Digital Services, as well as representatives from key infrastructure organizations throughout the state. And it has three primary goals. First is to develop a strategic plan for protecting the state's public sector and private sector information systems from a cyber attack. Second is to evaluate statewide cybersecurity readiness. And third is to conduct an inventory and review of cybersecurity standards and protocols for critical sector infrastructure. It's also worth noting that it is exempt from public records requirements if disclosing information would jeopardize cybersecurity. In terms of the progress that has been made, the first meeting of the Cybersecurity Advisory Council was delayed due to the July 2023 flood, as well as the departure of several key staff within the Vermont Agency of Digital Services, but they have since resolved the staffing issue and have had enough distance from the flood to actually meet for the first time. They will meet 2 more times before June 30th, 2024. They're statutorily mandated to meet 3 times before that point. And obviously, they've already met once already. The council has several specific goals that they must meet before June of 2024. First is to review and approve the report, which obviously they did, as I've read it. Second is to review legislative language for the definition of essential supply chain, which is defined in summary as the supply chain for the production of medical supplies, critical infrastructure, food systems, thermal systems, et cetera. A more detailed definition can be found in my report, but it's kind of a long one, so it doesn't really feel like the best use of time. The council did not recommend any changes to the definition after reviewing it, but I believe that the purpose of looking at it was just to sort of help establish good cybersecurity standards for, what is going to be, what could be a threat from a cyber attack, defining that more clearly, which would be an essential supply chain. Their third and largest goal is to develop and administer a statewide cybersecurity preparedness survey and then develop a fiscal year 2025 plan based on its results. They have yet to do that, but I believe that they are in the process of starting it, but they've yet to actually administer or fully develop the survey.
They're on their way.
Yes, I think they are on track to meet all of their goals by June 2024. The third and final meeting that I took a look at was a Senate Finance Committee meeting on S-180, which is an act relating to the investment of state funds in credit unions. It proposes to allow Vermont state funds to be invested in any Vermont credit union. Just a very sort of brief summary of what a credit union is. It's a not-for-profit membership-based cooperative financial institution. It is not subject to state or federal corporate taxes. they're membership based, and that membership base can be narrow, like a specific community or workplace, or large, the whole state, perhaps. It's up to the credit union to determine that. Often, but not always, they provide lower interest rates and will serve communities underserved by traditional financial institutions. Another brief definition to get out of the way before we get into the process itself is the franchise tax, which is a Vermont tax levied on deposits held by a bank over a 12-month period. It's collected monthly. Currently, the state brings in around $13 million a year in franchise tax money. It is worth noting that credit unions would not be subject to the tax if they were included in, they're not subject to the tax currently, but funds placed within them by the state would not be subject to the tax because they do not pay state or federal corporate taxes, of which that would be one of them. To get into the current investment process right now, currently there are about $2 billion in state funds subject to investment by the Office of the Treasurer. The state invests in banks through two different programs. First is its deposit relationship program. This makes up around half of all of state funds in terms of allocation. The Office of the Treasury deposits state funds in exchange for banking services and favorable interest rates from banks. They must also meet certain regulatory requirements, such as a DFR examination process, which evaluates banks regularly on their safety and soundness. And banks also must be able to collateralize and insure the deposits placed within them, which was stated by the Office of the Treasurer that was a expensive process for banks that maybe not all institutions are capable of doing. Speaking of which, only two institutions are currently capable of meeting those needs and requirements, according to the Treasurer's Office. That's M&T and TD Bank, which are the two largest banks operating within the state. The state currently has around a 5.5% interest rates on its deposits with those two banks, which is a very favorable rate.
Those two banks are paying a franchise tax on to the state on those deposits.
Yes.
Oh.
Around half of the total state funds, around $1 billion, are placed within those two banks. But I think the state makes most of its money on those deposits, not from the franchise tax, but from the favorable interest rates, because it only brings in around $13 million a year in franchise tax income from from all banks, and the number that it gets from the interest rates, actually, I did have that written down, but I believe it is more than that, than the $13 million a year.
Did the committee get a fiscal note from Joint Fiscal Office on what, those deposits, just those deposits bring into the state, and then possibly what could be the loss to the state?
That was a point that was sort of brought up by the committee, is how much of the franchise tax revenue might be lost by moving deposits into credit unions. I don't think they provided any specific number. I don't think anyone's actually necessarily crunched the numbers on that, but it was, I think, speculated that it would be unlikely to make a large impact on the state's funds, because the Treasurer's Office, and I'll get into the reasons why this would be the case, but the Treasurer's Office would be pretty unlikely to actually move very much money into credit unions to begin with.
Just wondering
Yeah.
what size credit unions do we have in the state, and
Yeah.
which ones would be able to be able to accept those deposits with all the stringent pieces that the treasurer is looking for?
That's a great question that was discussed at length within the meeting. The short answer is basically none. That was the answer given by Jeremiah Breer, who's the CFO of the State Treasurer's Office, because currently even most of the banks in Vermont, much less the credit unions, are able to actually meet those requirements because of the needs of the Treasurer's Office. I think credit unions and most banks within the state are both too small and aren't able to offer competitive interest rates at the same level of TD and M&T. There is a second program that exists within Vermont outside of those deposit relationships that would maybe be more.
Wiley, do you know what what was the, if the state can't invest their funds in the credit union because they're not gonna make any money, right? Because there'll be no tax income coming to the state. What was the impetus for the bill?
That's a great question that I am equally curious to know.
Okay.
I don't think they heard from
Your
the
head's sort of shaking.
introduction of the bill, and several committee members actually made that point as well. They were like, why? Because currently the state actually can invest in some credit unions. It can invest in community development credit unions, which are credit unions that serve like primarily low income members.
Yeah, like.
And it was argued that even if credit unions might not necessarily be economically competitive with banks, they maybe provide an essential service to people and it would be worth moving deposits into them. But the credit unions that are already kind of filling that role, the state can already invest within because they're community development credit unions. It's also worth noting that the state treasurer has a like fiduciary responsibility to like maximize the returns on state funds, and placing funds within a credit union while better opportunities exist in banks might actually be like against that duty. Like they might not be able to, legally is a strong word that I wouldn't necessarily feel confident putting the weight of that behind, but yeah, it might be beyond their responsibilities to actually allocate money into credit unions in the way that the bill allows them to. As I said previously, Jeremiah Breer, who's the CFO of the state treasurer's office, said that it was very unlikely that they would invest in credit unions, and he described the office's position on the bill as neutral, essentially. The only credit union that the state, I think, has done business with is Opportunities Credit Union, which is one of those community development credit unions. And that was a specific exception carved out in the like statute for the Department of Environmental Conservation, who had a program that required them partnering with Opportunities Credit Union. But I don't think that the state is really investing any funds significantly, or maybe any at all, in credit unions currently, or in Opportunities Credit Unions, community-based credit unions. We touched on a lot of the stuff just sort of through questioning, but it's worth noting that there's a second process in which the state invests funds into different financial institutions, and that's their Bank in Vermont program, in which they invest short-term deposits ranging from 3 to 18 months, maybe 3 to 12 months, but no more than 2 years, certainly, that are domiciled in or having branches within the boundaries of the state in Vermont. Currently, around 19 banks are eligible under that program. However, banks have to submit competitive bids to the Office of the Treasurer to participate and receive those deposits. And over the last several years, only TD Bank has actually submitted a bid, which is likely due to their ability to offer competitive rates and provide the services that the Office of the Treasurer needs. But if credit unions were included, they would almost certainly receive funds through the Bank in Vermont program, not through the deposit relationship program, because of their small size. And yeah, that is more or less the gist of S180. I also was sort of confused as to why the bill exists. It doesn't mandate that they put funds in credit unions, and it allows them. So I assume that it wouldn't necessarily do any harm, but it doesn't seem to really do that much good either, just from my perspective.
Doesn't seem to work in our own best interest.
Yeah.
Not knowing a lot more about it than just officially.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm wondering, who is the lead sponsor of the bill?
I don't have that written down.
Okay.
Do they talk about community banks, like, because I think that was a term that, what you called it, something else, a community?
Oh, yeah. It's all mixed up.
I remember you, like, during like the depth of the COVID pandemic, certain banks were able to receive money, and there were those, the community,
Community reinvestment
okay,
requirement.
okay.
I think that is the intention of the Bank in Vermont program. It's putting like deposits in banks that are like domiciled within the state. So the deposits aren't leaving the state. But as I said previously, like currently, I don't think any banks are able to really compete with the larger banks within the state in terms of their interest rates and those banks are also still subject to a lot of the same like regulatory requirements that the banking or the deposit relationships are. And those can be costly and I think administratively burdensome to banks.
Those two banks are federally regulated.